Welcome to Boiled, Baked, and Bewildered, the only history series where the drama is mild, the food is boiled, and the pacing is perfect for falling asleep. Tonight, we journey through medieval Ireland, where kings feasted on goose and peasants gnawed on mossy oatcakes. There are no battles here, just barley, no betrayals, just broth. So, if you're ready to drift off to tales of turnips, questionable stews, and the noble art of boiling things until they surrender, fluff your pillow, dim the torchlight, and let's begin. And hey, if you enjoy snoring through centuries and giggling at goose guts, don't forget to like, subscribe, and let your dreams be seasoned with just a pinch of medieval nonsense. Long before the potato arrived to revolutionize Irish cuisine and later cause catastrophic famine, Ireland's medieval kitchens were a quiet battlefield of barley, oats, and culinary compromise. The year is 1150. The weather is damp. The mood is damp. The food? Also damp. Peasants lived in small, smoky dwellings where the hearth doubled as stove, heater, and occasional chicken spa. Meals were simple, repetitive, and deeply uninspiring. Breakfast was often yesterday's dinner, reheated with a splash of rainwater. Lunch was a mystery. Dinner was a negotiation between hunger and despair. The peasant pantry. Let's peek inside the average peasant's pantry. It's dark. It smells faintly of moss and goat, and it contains barley gruel, a thick gray paste that could double as mortar, oatcakes, dry, flat, and emotionally unavailable, wild greens, forage from hedgerows, and suspiciously bitter, goat milk, served lukewarm with a hint of goat. Meat was rare. If you were lucky, you might get a sliver of salted pork once a month, usually from a pig that had died of natural causes and mild resentment. Chickens were more valuable alive, eggs, than dead. Soupy disappointment. Fish was common, but only if you lived near water and had the patience to argue with a trout. Culinary wisdom of the elders, recipes were passed down orally, often with dramatic flair. Take the barley, boil it again. Curse the English, serve. Cooking was less about flavor and more about survival. Seasoning was considered suspicious. Garlic was exotic, and salt was a luxury, often traded for things like wool, gossip, or a mildly enchanted spoon. Sleepy side effects. The food was so bland, so relentlessly beige, that it had a sedative effect. After a bowl of barley mush, peasants would drift into a gentle stupor, dreaming of slightly better mush. Ita said that one monk fell asleep mid-chew and woke up 3 days later with a beard full of porridge. Even the livestock seemed drowsy. Cows mooed in lowercase. Chickens clucked in slow motion. The village dog, named Soggy, once slept through a Viking raid. A goat named Fergus. Every village had a goat. Ours was Fergus. He was mildly judgmental and deeply lactose forward. Fergus once ate an entire scroll of tax records and was briefly declared mayor. His milk was used in everything, from soup to soap to a failed attempt at cheese, that historians now refer to as the incident. Fergus also had a habit of standing in doorways, blocking traffic, and staring into the middle distance, like he knew something about the future. He didn't. But it was comforting. The weekly feast, sort of. Once a week, the village gathered for a communal meal. It was called the feast, though that was optimistic. Everyone brought what they had. A turnip, half a leek, a questionable mushroom, regret. The stew that resulted was thick, mysterious, and slightly judgmental. It was served in wooden bowls and eaten with spoons carved from anxiety. Afterward, villagers would sit in silence, digesting slowly and wondering if the mushroom had been a mistake. Historical records, monastic scribes recorded these meals with great care. On the 14th day of the moon, Brother Aidan brought forth a beet. It was met with polite applause. Sister Moira contributed a parsnip of dubious origin. The stew was adequate. These records were later used as sleep aids for novice monks. One scroll, titled On the Texture of Barley, was banned for being too effective. While peasants gnawed on oatcakes and whispered to turnips, the kings of medieval Ireland dined with slightly more flair, and significantly more flatulence. Inside the drafty halls of Gaelic nobility, meals were grand in theory and gassy in practice. Picture long wooden tables, flickering torchlight, and a goose so overcooked it could be used as a weapon. Servants bustled about with trenchers, flatbread plates, pitchers of ale, and a suspicious pudding that may or may not contain raisins. No one was sure. The royal menu, a typical kingly feast, included roast goose, dry, chewy, and mildly judgmental. Ale, served warm, cloudy, and emotionally unstable. Boiled peas, the color of regret. Honeyed turnips, a dish that confused everyone, including the turnips. Meat was a symbol of power, so kings ate it often, usually surrounded by bards, singing about how heroic it was to consume a lamb shank without flinching. Vegetables were tolerated, but only if they wore a glaze. Table manners, etiquette was loose. Forks hadn't arrived yet, so fingers did the heavy lifting. Napkins were rare. Sleeves were common. Burping was considered a compliment to the chef, and sneezing into your ale was seen as seasoning. One lord, famously nicknamed Sir Snort, once sneezed so violently during supper that he launched a pea into the bishop's goblet. It was declared a miracle. The aftermath. After feasting, nobles reclined on benches, groaning softly and contemplating their life choices. The ale kicked in. The goose settled. The pudding lingered. A bard might begin a slow, droning ballad about a heroic carrot. Sleep was inevitable. Even kings, with all their power and poultry, could not escape the sedative power of medieval Irish cuisine. It was the great equalizer. Whether you were crowned or barefoot, food would eventually lull you into a nap. In the year 1172, deep in the mossy folds of County Offaly, a scandal unfolded that would shake the very crust of Irish nobility. It began, as most great tragedies do, with an oatcake. Lady Bridget of Ballysnore had prepared her famous oatcake for the annual Festival of Mildly Edible Things. It was dry. It was dense. It was, according to one monk, a spiritual experience in chewing. But when Lord Cormac of Cromwell took a bite, something snapped, not in the oatcake, but in his patience. The incident. Lord Cormac, known for his delicate digestion and dramatic flair, declared the oatcake an insult to flour. He flung it across the banquet hall, where it struck a tapestry depicting Saint Oatwin, the Bland. The tapestry fell. A candle tipped. A goose panicked. Chaos ensued. The oatcake, now lodged in a goblet, was declared cursed. Lady Bridget wept into a bowl of barley. The goose was never seen again. Political fallout. The oatcake incident sparked a feud between the houses of Ballynor and Cromwell. Trade routes were blocked. Turnip tariffs were imposed. One bard composed a 47-verse ballad titled The Crumb of War, which was banned for being too catchy. Peasants, meanwhile, continued eating oatcakes in quiet defiance. It's chewy, they said, but it's ours. Sleepy consequences, the king, exhausted by oatcake diplomacy, called for a summit. Nobles gathered, oatcakes were sampled, and a compromise was reached. All future oatcakes must be soaked in ale for no less than 3 hours before serving. This led to a new dish called alacake, which was soggy, confusing, and deeply beloved. The kingdom exhaled. Peace returned. The tapestry was rehung. Lady Brigid was knighted for culinary resilience, and the oatcake, now enshrined in legend, became a symbol of sleepy resistance. In medieval Ireland, ale wasn't just a beverage, it was a lifestyle, a mood, and occasionally a mild form of time travel. Brewed in smoky huts by people who measured ingredients with vibes, ale was the drink of choice for peasants, nobles, monks, and one famously tipsy goose named Declan. It was cloudy, warm, and slightly unpredictable. Historians believe it may have contained traces of barley, honey, moss, and the occasional beetle for texture. The brewing ritual, brewing ale, was a sacred tradition passed down through generations with instructions like boil the barley, whisper to the hops, ignore the screaming. The village brewer, usually someone named Maeve or Fergus, would stir the cauldron while muttering ancient incantations like, please don't explode. The result was a frothy, earthy concoction that tasted like damp celebration. Temporal side effects. 1 mug of ale could make you forget your chores. 2 mugs could make you forget your name. 3 mugs, and you'd wake up in a haystack next to a confused cow named Gerald. Entire festivals were lost to ale-induced amnesia. The Feast of St. Soggy was celebrated 3 times in 1 month because no one could remember if they hadn't already done it. A bard once composed a song titled Where Did Tuesday Go?, which became an unofficial anthem for ale drinkers across the land. Ale and sleep. Despite its chaotic reputation, ale was also deeply soothing. After a long day of oatcakes and existential dread, villagers would gather around the hearth, sip their ale, and drift into a gentle stupor. Snoring echoed through the hills. Dreams were slow, barley-scented, and occasionally narrated by Saint Oatwin. Even the monks, sworn to silence and sobriety, had a secret stash labeled, Holy Water, do not sip. It was ale. Everyone knew. No one judged. The ale goose Declan, the village goose, once fell into a vat of ale and emerged profoundly philosophical. He spent 3 days honking at the moon and was briefly worshipped as a minor deity. His followers, known as the ale honkers, believed that sleep was sacred and that oatcakes should be dunked before consumed. Declan eventually sobered up and returned to his usual hobby, biting nobles in the foggy hills of medieval Munster, nestled between 2 mildly confused rivers. There lived a cheesemaker named Aithna. Her cheese was famous, not for its flavor, but for its structural integrity. It was dense. It was durable. It was, according to one monk, a theological challenge. Aithna's signature wheel, known locally as the brick, could survive a fall from a castle tower, a Viking raid, and one unfortunate incident involving a catapult. It was cheese, yes, but also a statement. The cheese trials. Every spring, the village held the cheese trials, a gentle competition to see whose dairy creation could withstand the most abuse. Aithna's wheel won 3 years in a row. It was dropped, kicked, hurled, and once used to block a drafty window during a storm. It remained unchanged. The window did not. One bard wrote, O wheel of way, thou art unyielding, thy rind, a fortress, thy scent, A warning. Ingredients of fortitude. The recipe was simple. Goat milk, preferably from a goat with attitude. Salt, liberally applied and emotionally charged. Time, lots of it. Aging took 14 months and 2 existential crises. Aithna claimed the secret was emotional fermentation, which involved yelling at the Kurds during the waxing moon. No one questioned her. She once stared down a bishop, cheese as defense, during a brief skirmish with a rival village over turnip rights. Aithna's cheese was stacked along the perimeter, like barricades. Arrows bounced off. One knight tripped over a wheel and reconsidered his life choices. Peace was declared shortly after. The cheese was later knighted. Its title, Sir Cheddar of Cragwall. It was given a tiny helmet and a ceremonial spoon. Sleepy side effects. Despite its reputation, the cheese was edible. Barely. Villagers would nibble it slowly, often while staring into the fire and contemplating moss. It was said to induce vivid dreams, mostly involving goats and unresolved paperwork. One monk claimed he saw Saint Otwin riding a wheel of cheese across the sky. He was later promoted. In the misty kitchens of medieval Ireland, soup was less a dish and more a philosophical exercise. It asked questions like, is this edible? And did someone cry into this? The answer was usually yes, known locally as broth, pottage, or that thing in the cauldron. Soup was a staple among peasants and nobles alike. It was made from whatever was available, which often included turnips, questionable herbs, and the lingering memory of flavor. Ingredients of uncertainty. A typical recipe went something like this: 1 onion, or something pretending to be one, a handful of greens, foraged, possibly cursed, water, rainwater preferred, puddle acceptable, regret, to taste. Meat was optional, so was seasoning. Texture ranged from thin and suspicious to thick enough to patch a roof. The soup was served in wooden bowls, often with a side of silence. The pork incident. One winter, a pig named Seamus fell into the soup pot. He was not invited. The villagers debated whether this counted as seasoning or sabotage. The soup was served anyway. It was described as surprisingly chewy and emotionally complex. Seamus survived. He later became a local legend and opened a tavern. Sleepy side effects. Soup was deeply soporific. After one bowl, villagers would slump by the hearth, staring into the middle distance and humming tuneless lullabies. Dreams were slow, broth-colored, and often involved floating turnips. Monks used soup as a meditation aid. One scroll reads, "We stirred, we sipped, we slept. Amen." Even nobles weren't immune. One lord famously fell asleep mid-sip and woke up 3 days later with a ladle in his beard. The chicken that refused. Not all animals were cooperative. A chicken named Nuala once escaped the soup pot 3 times, earning the nickname the Feathered Fugitive. She later joined a traveling bard troupe and wrote a ballad titled Cluck No More. Her soup was eventually made without her. It was bland. She was missed. In the year 1203, the village of Drowsing Hollow prepared for its annual harvest feast, a celebration of barley, turnips, and the ability to survive another year without being eaten by wolves. Bunting was hung. A goose was mildly threatened. Spirits were high. Expectations were cautiously optimistic. The feast was scheduled to begin at sundown. It ended 4 minutes later. The setup. Villagers gathered around a long wooden table, lovingly decorated with moss and one confused beetle. The menu included oat cakes, dry barley stew, thicker than expected, goat cheese, emotionally distant, a single apple, shared, a bard tuned his harp, a monk lit a candle, someone sneezed. The mood was festive. The incident. As the first ladle of stew was served, a gust of wind blew out the candle. In the darkness, someone mistook the cheese for a napkin. The apple rolled off the table and was immediately claimed by a passing dog named Bran. The oatcakes crumbled. The stew congealed. The harp snapped. By minute 4, the feast had devolved into quiet, chewing and existential reflection. Blame the goat. Fergus the goat, now retired from politics, was blamed for the chaos. He had wandered into the feast wearing a ceremonial hat and knocked over the stew pot while attempting to eat the tablecloth. No one was surprised. Fergus had a history. He was escorted out with mild applause. Sleepy aftermath. Despite the brevity of the feast, villagers declared it a success. We gathered, said one elder. We chewed. We survived. The bard composed a haiku. Oatcake in my hand, stew gone, goat in the moonlight. 4 minutes of joy. The feast was later commemorated with a small plaque that read, We tried. Historical footnote. Monastic records list the event as the Feast of Fleeting Flavor. It was used as a cautionary tale in culinary schools for centuries. One scroll reads, Let not thy goat wear hats. Let not thy stew be proud. In the sleepy hamlet of Tumblewick, nestled between 2 hills that looked suspiciously like old loaves of bread, a culinary controversy was quietly simmering. The subject? Pudding. Not a grand pudding, not a flaming pudding, just a modest, beige, barley-based blob, known locally as the gentle lump. The contenders, 2 elders, Maeve the measured and Donnell the slightly damp, had differing views on how the pudding should be served. Maeve insisted it be boiled, then left to contemplate its existence for 3 hours. Donnell preferred it baked, then gently insulted to enhance flavor. Neither method produced a discernible difference in taste. But the debate persisted. The Great Pudding Forum, a town meeting, was called. Attendance was mandatory, unless you were a goat. Fergus, now a food critic, attended anyway. Arguments were made. Boiling preserves the soul, said Maeve. Baking awakens the pudding's dreams, countered Donnell. It's beige, said Fergus. Let it be. The debate lasted 47 minutes and was interrupted twice by a passing sheep choir. The taste test. To settle the matter, 2 puddings were prepared, one boiled, one baked, both served with a drizzle of mystery sauce, later revealed to be rainwater and optimism. Villagers tasted. They nodded. They shrugged. One person said, I feel unchanged. The final verdict, both are fine. Let's never speak of this again. Historical footnote. The event was recorded in the village scrolls as the Great Pudding Indifference. A marginal note reads, 2 puddings entered. No one cared. The pudding itself was later honored with a small statue, a lump carved from turnip, wearing a tiny crown. Sleepy aftermath. Maeve and Donnell reconciled over a shared bowl of stew. They agreed that pudding, like life, is best when mildly confusing and served warm. The villagers returned to their usual activities, napping, whittling spoons, avoiding debates. In the misty village of Mumblebrook, nestled between 2 suspiciously damp hills, lived a cheese so vocal it was banned from 3 monasteries and 1 poetry club. Its name? Whispermelt. Its crime? Excessive commentary. origins of the offender Whispermelt was crafted by Brother Cillian, a monk with a passion for dairy and a tendency to hum Gregorian chants into the curd. Legend says the cheese absorbed his murmurs, along with a few unsolicited opinions about turnips. When aged properly, Whispermelt emitted faint whispers like, "You could do better. This too lacks ambition. Have you considered a softer spoon?" Village reactions. At first, villagers were intrigued. A cheese with thoughts? Revolutionary. But soon, the whispers grew louder. One farmer reported, "I was milking the cow, and the cheese told me I was doing it wrong. It doesn't even have hands." Another claimed the cheese criticized her oatcakes. "I baked them with love," she said. The cheese said they tasted like regret. The Council of Crumbs. A town meeting was held. Fergus the goat, now a licensed therapist, moderated. Solutions were proposed. Bury the cheese. Too dramatic. Melt it into silence. Ethically questionable. Send it to a monastery in Wales. Already tried. Returned with a note. Too chatty. Eventually, they settled on placing Whispermelt in the village library, where its whispers were considered literary ambiance. Sleepy aftermath. Whispermelt became a local legend. Tourists came to hear its critiques. One bard wrote, "The cheese spoke truth. I cried, then I ate it." Brother Cillian retired from cheesemaking and took up silent bread baking. The village returned to its usual pace, slow, crumbly, and mildly judgmental. Historical footnote. Whispermelt was later classified as a semi-sentient dairy product and featured in the Codex of Curious Cuisine. A marginal note reads, "Best served with thick skin and a sense of humor." In the foggy village of Slumbermere, nestled beside a lake that occasionally sighed, a culinary mystery was bubbling. Or rather, not bubbling. The villagers had prepared a grand cauldron of root vegetable soup for the annual Festival of Mild Warmth. But the soup? It refused to simmer. The setup. The ingredients were humble and hopeful. Turnips, washed twice. Parsnips, emotionally stable. Leeks whispered encouragement. A dash of thyme, borrowed from a monk. The cauldron was placed over a fire. Prayers were mumbled, and spoons were polished. But after 3 hours, the soup remained. Tepid, not cold, not hot, just vaguely lukewarm, like a handshake from someone named Gerald. Suspicions arise. Brother Niall, the village soup sage, declared, "The soup is resisting. It has chosen its temperature." Some blamed the firewood, too philosophical. Others blamed the turnips, too introverted. Fergus the goat suggested the soup was having a moment. A local bard composed a lament. "Simmer, O soup, thy warmth eludes me still. I sip, I sigh, I shrug. Experimental phase." The villagers tried everything, stirring counterclockwise, whispering compliments to the broth, threatening it with a ladle. One brave soul added a potato. The soup responded by becoming slightly smug. Eventually, traveling alchemist was consulted. He poked the soup, sniffed it, and declared, "It's not soup, it's a mood." Sleepy resolution. The villagers gave up. They served the soup as is, calling it ambient broth. It was paired with dry oat cakes and a sense of acceptance. Reviews were mixed. "It's fine," said one elder. "It reminds me of my uncle," said another. "I feel unchanged," said everyone else. The festival continued with quiet chewing and a brief nap. Historical footnote. The event was recorded in the Chronicles of Culinary Confusion as the Lukewarm Rebellion. A marginal note reads, "Sometimes the soup chooses silence." The cauldron was later used as a bird bath. The soup was never seen again. In the village of Crumblecross, where the wind often smelled faintly of onions and regret, a loaf of bread was baked with more than just yeast. It was baked with vengeance. Its name? Grudge crust. Its origin? A feud between two bakers and one very judgmental sourdough starter. The bakers, Beef Bridget, the bold, and Eamon the mild, had once been partners in pastry, but after a heated disagreement over the correct number of raisins in a bun, Bridget said 7, Eamon said none. Raisins are lies. They split their bakery in two. Bridget kept the oven, Eamon kept the broom. Neither spoke again, except through passive-aggressive bread. Birth of the loaf Bridget, in a moment of flour-fueled spite, created grudge crust, rye flour, dark and brooding, salt, extra, a sourdough starter named Malice 1, handwritten insult folded into the dough. The loaf emerged from the oven with a crust so firm it could deflect gossip. It smelled faintly of resentment and time. The bread speaks, metaphorically. Grudge crust was served at village gatherings. It made statements. "Oh, you brought oatcakes. How brave." "I remember when stew had flavor. I'm not bitter. I'm baked that way." Villagers were unsure whether to eat it or apologize to it. Resolution by Crumb Fergus, the goat, now a certified conflict mediator, arranged a peace meal. Bridget and Eamon were seated at opposite ends of a long table. Grudge crust was placed in the center, flanked by butter and cautious optimism. They broke bread, literally. The crust cracked. The tension softened. Bridget admitted she may have oversalted. Eamon confessed he secretly liked raisins. The loaf was eaten. The feud was toasted. Grudge crust was never baked again, but its legacy lived on in slightly awkward buns. Historical footnote. The event was recorded in the annals of emotional baking as the crusty reconciliation. A marginal note reads, "Bread may rise, but grudges should not." The sourdough starter. Malice was retired and renamed Mildred. She now lives in a jar near the monastery, in the village of Hushford, where the rivers babbled politely and the trees were known to sigh in unison. A peculiar ale was brewed. It was golden. It was fizzy. It was nameless. Not because it hadn't been named, because it kept forgetting. The brewing blunder. Brewmaster Chauvin had crafted the ale with care. Barley, confident. Hops, slightly sarcastic. Yeast, emotionally unavailable. A splash of elderflower for whimsy. She named it Golden Whimsy. The ale responded by bubbling once, then forgetting entirely. Each time someone asked its name, it fizzed, paused, and replied, "I was something. I think. Maybe Gerald?" Village reactions. At first, villagers found it charming. An ale with amnesia, they said. How delightfully unhelpful. But soon, confusion spread. Was it golden whimsy, bubbly fog, ale McAleface? One bard tried to write a drinking song, but gave up halfway through the chorus. Oh, drink ye the, thing that bubbles and forgets, attempts to remind it. The village tried everything, whispering its name into the keg, writing it on a scroll, and taping it to the barrel, teaching it mnemonic rhymes, golden whimsy, sips so primsy. Nothing worked. The ale remained blissfully unaware of its own identity. Fergus the goat, now dabbling in beverage therapy, declared, "It's not lost. It's just present, sleepy resolution. Eventually, the villagers stopped trying. They simply called it that one. It became the most popular drink in Hushford, not for its taste, but for its existential relatability. One elder said, "I too forget things. This ale understands me." The tavern renamed itself the Place with That One. No signage needed. Everyone knew. Historical footnote. The ale was recorded in the scrolls of slightly confused spirits as the beverage of blurred being. A marginal note reads, "It was fizzy, it was kind, it was something." The original recipe was lost when the scroll forgot where it was stored. In the village of Winklenap, where the clouds moved at the pace of polite conversation, and the soil was known for its emotional depth, a turnip rose to stardom. Its name, Turlo. Its secret, mild charisma and excellent lighting. The contest. Every spring, Winklenap hosted the Root of the Realm contest, a celebration of vegetables that had survived winter without complaint. The categories included most symmetrical, least judgmental, best in stew, Turlo, a modest turnip with a slightly smug curve, entered the contest with no expectations. He was placed beside a cocky carrot and a beetroot with a dramatic backstory. The rise to fame. During judging, Turlo did nothing. He didn't sparkle. He didn't roll. He simply sat there, unbothered, unpeeled, and quietly confident. The judges were moved. "He's grounded," whispered one. "I feel safe," said another. "I want to knit him a hat," said a third. Turlo won all three categories. The crowd applauded. A bard fainted. Village reactions. The village was stunned. "He's just a turnip," said one elder. "Yes," replied another. "But he's our turnip." Turlo was paraded through town on a wheelbarrow lined with moss. Fergus the goat, now a talent agent, offered him a 3-leaf clover endorsement deal. A statue was commissioned. A turnip, mid-thought, gazing into the middle distance. Sleepy aftermath. Turlo retired from public life shortly after the contest. Fame, he said, through a translator, was a bit much. He now resides in a cool cellar, occasionally visited by fans who whisper compliments and leave offerings of butter. The contest continues each year, but no vegetable has matched Turlo's quiet magnetism. One potato tried wearing a cape. It was disqualified for showboating. Historical footnote. Turlo's victory was recorded in the Chronicles of Celebrated Crops as the Turnip Ascension. A marginal note reads, "He did nothing, and we loved him for it." His story is now taught in local schools as a lesson in humility, root-based resilience, and the power of just showing up. In the village of Splotterfen, where the grass grew sideways and the cows were known for their emotional intelligence, a batch of butter became briefly famous and dangerously mobile. Its name? Slipsheen. Its crime? Excessive enthusiasm. The churn herd round the village Slipsheen was churned during the annual Festival of Dairy and Mild Applause, crafted by Sister Blythine, a nun with strong forearms and a soft spot for chaos. The butter was unusually glossy. It gleamed. It glistened. It glared. Villagers gathered to admire it. Someone whispered, "It looks fast." They were not wrong. The incident. During the ceremonial unveiling, Slipsheen was placed on a silver platter atop a slightly wobbly barrel. A breeze blew. A goat sneezed. The butter slid. It hit the cobblestones with a gentle plop, then began to roll, slowly at first, then with alarming grace. Villagers panicked. One child shouted, "It's escaping." A bard dropped his lute. Fergus the goat, now a butter safety consultant, yelled, "Contain the dairy." The butter rolled through the market, past the stew stall, under the oatcake cart, and directly into the mayor's ceremonial shoe. The stampede. In the confusion, several villagers slipped on the buttery trail. One monk performed an accidental cartwheel. A turnip vendor declared bankruptcy mid-fall. The mayor's shoe was declared emotionally compromised. The stampede lasted 7 minutes and resulted in 3 bruised egos, 1 slightly dented spoon. A new village law: no butter shall travel unaccompanied. Sleepy resolution: Slipsheen was eventually captured and placed in a chilled jar labeled "Do Not Agitate." It was later served on oatcakes at a peace brunch. Reviews were glowing. Chaotic, but creamy. Pairs well with forgiveness. I slipped, but I healed. Sister Blythine retired from butter and took up contemplative jam making. Historical footnote: the event was recorded in the dairy scrolls of mild alarm as the Great Butter Escape. A marginal note reads, "It rolled. We ran. It was delicious." Slipsheen's trail was preserved in cobblestone lore and occasionally reenacted by local children wearing butter hats in the misty village of Sniffleton, where the fog was permanent and the ducks were known to sigh. An onion named Lachlan became the center of a very wet misunderstanding. It began, as most things do in Sniffleton, with a stew, and ended with a town-wide emotional reckoning. The onion in question. Lachlan was no ordinary onion. He was large. He was layered. He had a faint aura of melancholy, and smelled faintly of unresolved tension. When chopped, he didn't sting the eyes. He stung the soul. Villagers reported, "I remembered my ex. I questioned my life choices. I cried, then apologized to a spoon." The culinary catastrophe. During the annual Festival of Feelings and Food, Lachlan was chosen as the centerpiece of the ceremonial stew. As soon as he was sliced, the village wept. Not just sniffles, full sobs. One bard collapsed into a pile of oatcakes. A goat named Noreen wrote a poem. The stew was abandoned. The onion was placed on a velvet cushion and declared too powerful. The debate at town meeting was called, was Lachlan magical? Was he cursed? Was he just really good at being an onion? Fergus the goat, now a licensed grief counselor, suggested, he's not cursed. He's just honest. The villagers nodded, then cried again. Sleepy resolution. Lachlan was not eaten. He was planted in the village garden, surrounded by candles and soft music. Visitors came to sit near him and reflect. One monk claimed he heard the onion whisper, "It's okay to feel things." The stew was remade using a less emotional leek. It was bland. Everyone was grateful. Historical footnote. Lachlan's tale was recorded in the scrolls of sentimental vegetables. As the great crying, a marginal note reads, "We chopped, we sobbed, we healed." The velvet cushion was later used to seat turnips during therapy sessions. In the village of Crumble-on-Way, where the sun rose reluctantly and the roosters were unionized, a grand feast was planned to celebrate the arrival of spring. It was meant to be lavish. It was meant to be legendary. It was meant to be dinner. It was not. The planning Lady Bramble, the local event coordinator and part-time spoon polisher, had spent weeks preparing a roast goose with existential seasoning, a pudding that required a permit, a centerpiece made entirely of edible moss. Invitations were sent. Candles were lit. The villagers arrived in formal socks. The mistake. Unfortunately, the feast was scheduled for first light, which, due to a clerical error and a misbehaving sundial, was interpreted as breakfast time. The villagers, confused but hungry, arrived at dawn. The roast goose was still asleep. The pudding was emotionally unavailable. The moss centerpiece had been eaten by a philosophical badger. So they did what any sleepy crowd would do. They made toast. The improvised menu, the feast became toast with ambiguous jam eggs that may have been borrowed, tea steeped in mild regret, a single sausage that was passed around ceremonially. Lady Bramble wept softly into a crumpet. The villagers declared it the most relatable feast ever. The Rooster Rebellion. Midway through the meal, the roosters arrived wearing protest sashes. They demanded later sunrises, more oats a say. In menu planning, negotiations were held over marmalade. The roosters agreed to crow only on weekends. Sleepy resolution. Though the feast was not what anyone expected, it became a cherished tradition. Every spring, the villagers gather at dawn, dressed in pajamas and philosophical confusion, to eat breakfast and reflect on the nature of planning. Lady Bramble now coordinates events using a calendar, a compass, and a psychic duck. Historical footnote: the event is commemorated in the Chronicles of Culinary Confusion as the brunch that wasn't. A marginal note reads, "We aimed for grandeur. We landed in toast. It was enough." The single sausage was later bronzed and placed in the village museum under shared experiences. In the village of Tattle on Crumb, where gossip was currency and the pigeons were unusually judgmental, a pie emerged that changed everything. It was baked by Mildred Butterfluff, a woman known for her crusts, her candor, and her ability to detect lies using only nutmeg. The pie was meant to be simple. It was not. The filling of suspicion. The pie contained apples that had overheard things, cinnamon with a vendetta, a whisper of clove that once worked in intelligence. When sliced, the pie emitted a faint hum. When served, it revealed secrets. Villagers who took a bite found themselves blurting out, "I stole a spoon in 1993. I never liked Gerald's beard. I once kissed a turnip for science." The pie was declared too honest. The investigation concerned. The village council launched an inquiry. They questioned Mildred. They questioned the apples. They questioned themselves. The pie remained silent, but every time someone approached, it seemed to jiggle knowingly. A bard wrote, "It was flaky, yet firm, sweet, yet judgmental. I feared it, and I loved it." The trial. The pie was put on trial. Charges included emotional trespassing, unauthorized truth-telling, being delicious under false pretenses. The defense argued, "It's just a pie. Let it live." The prosecution countered, "It knows things. It must be stopped." The jury, all goats, voted 3-2 in favor of exile. Sleepy resolution. The pie was not eaten. It was placed on a velvet pedestal in the village museum, next to the bronzed sausage. Visitors were warned. Do not nibble unless emotionally prepared. Mildred retired from baking and took up interpretive dance. The apples were reassigned to cider duty. Historical footnote: the event is recorded in the annals of edible espionage as the tart that talked. A marginal note reads, "We bit, we confessed, we learned." The pie remains intact to this day, occasionally vibrating when someone lies nearby. In the frosty hamlet of Grumble on Rind, where the cows wore scarves and the milk had opinions, a cheese was born that simply would not melt. Its name was Reginald. It was firm. It was proud. It was emotionally unavailable. The origins of Reginald was crafted during a thunderstorm by a cheesemaker named Dottie Wayfield, who believed in aging gracefully and yelling at clouds. She claimed Reginald was too mature for melting, philosophically solid, the kind of cheese that reads Tolstoy villagers tried to melt him. In soup, he floated. On toast, he sulked. In fondue, he quoted Nietzsche. Reginald remained resolutely intact. The great melt-off. Frustrated, the village held a melt-off. Contestants brought cheeses of all kinds. Brie that wept, Gouda that giggled, a cheddar with unresolved trauma. Reginald was placed in a cauldron over a fire fueled by emotional baggage. He did not melt. He hardened slightly and whispered, "I'm not ready." Dottie applauded. The crowd booed politely. The cheese therapist, a therapist named Dr. Crumble, was brought in to help Reginald let go. Sessions included guided fondue visualization, journaling about curd formation, group therapy with emotionally repressed yogurts. Reginald opened up slightly. He softened at the edges. He admitted he once wanted to be a spread. Progress was made. Melting was not. Sleepy resolution. Eventually, the village accepted Reginald's boundaries. He was placed on a velvet shelf in the library next to the pie from Chapter 17 and the sausage from Chapter 16. Visitors came to sit near him and reflect on their own resistance to change. Dottie began crafting cheeses that were emotionally available, but still had strong boundaries. Reginald occasionally winked at passing fondue pots. Historical footnote. The event is recorded in the dairy diaries of defiance as the melt that never was. A marginal note reads, "We heeded, we hoped, we respected." Reginald remains unmelted to this day, a symbol of firm resolve and lactose-based self-care. In the village of Huffington Crust, where the ovens were moody and the flour had opinions, a loaf of bread rose, not because it was baked well, but because it was offended. Its name was spite bread. Its origin? A failed recipe and a very pointed comment. The spark baker Finnegan Loafley, known for his dramatic apron, flourishes, and passive-aggressive kneading, had been told by a rival, "Your dough is emotionally flat." Finnegan, wounded but determined, threw together a batch of dough, using rye flour, resentful, yeast, overstimulated, salt, petty, water, collected during a thunderstorm. He muttered insults while kneading. He glared at the oven. He refused to set a timer. The dough rose, and kept rising. The rise heard. Round the village spite bread expanded beyond its pan. It climbed the oven walls. It knocked over a jar of pickles. It whispered, "I'll show them." Villagers gathered to watch. One bard fainted. Fergus the goat, now a motivational speaker, declared, "This loaf is powered by feelings." The bread was removed from the oven, using a broom and a firm apology. The confrontation Finnegan's rival, Maeve Crumble, arrived to inspect the loaf. She poked it. "It jiggled," she said. "It's impressive." Spite bread responded by cracking slightly and releasing a puff of steam shaped like a smug eyebrow. Finnegan wept into a tea towel. Maeve offered him a truce. They shook hands over a slice of emotionally complex toast. Sleepy resolution. Spite bread was served at the village brunch. It was chewy, dense, and oddly inspiring. Villagers reported, "I feel seen. This bread has boundaries. I'm going to confront my oatcake." Finnegan and Maeve opened a bakery together called Crumb and Catharsis. Their slogan, We bake what we feel. Spite bread was retired, but its spirit lived on in every loaf that refused to be rushed. Historical footnote. The event is recorded in the scrolls of sentient sourdough as the rise of emotion. A marginal note reads, "It wasn't just bread. It was a reckoning." The original loaf was bronzed and placed beside the pie, sausage, and cheese in the village museum's Gallery of Edible Defiance. It began with a pot, a very large pot, one so wide it required 3 villagers, a goat, and a pulley system just to stir it. The occasion? The annual Hufflington Crust Comfort Food Festival, where the motto was, "If it doesn't make you drowsy, it's not worth chewing." The ingredients of sleep. The stew contained mashed turnips, emotionally supportive, parsnips, introverted, leeks, whispering affirmations, a single dumpling named Gerald, who had dreams of being a poet. As the pot simmered, the aroma drifted across the village like a lullaby. Children yawned mid-skip. Elders nodded off in rocking chairs. Even Fergus, the goat, paused his motivational speech to lie down and reflect. The feast. Villagers gathered with blankets and bowls. Finnegan Loafley and Maeve Crumble served ladles of stew while humming lullabies in minor keys. The bread was soft. The butter was apologetic. The tea was brewed with chamomile and unresolved feelings. One by one, villagers began to recline. Some curled up under tables. Others used bread rolls as pillows. Gerald the dumpling recited a haiku and then gently sank beneath the broth. Steam rises slowly. Parsnip dreams and leek whispers. I nap, therefore stew. The nap circle. By twilight, the village square resembled a cozy battlefield of contentment. Snoring harmonized with the crackle of the fire. A bard played a lullaby on a lute made of cheese. Even the mayor, who once banned naps after 3 p.m., was found curled up inside a giant teacup. The stew pot was empty, the villagers were full, and the stars blinked approvingly. So ends our tale, dear curious, of bread that rose in protest, pies that plotted, and stews that soothed even the most restless soul. Tonight, may your dreams be seasoned with humor, your thoughts gently simmered, and your worries folded like pastry dough beneath a warm blanket of calm. Let the village of Hufflington Crust fade into the mist, where dumplings write poetry, goats give TED Talks, and every meal ends in a nap. Close your eyes. Let the crusty chaos settle and drift off knowing that somewhere a loaf is rising. Not out of spite this time, but out of love. Good night. You've earned your rest.